Things up online. So if you're looking for it and it's not there, just remind me, because I have to upload them to YouTube and then put the YouTube link online, and yeah, sometimes I forget to do that. Okay, so I'm going to share with you PowerPoint for this week. Actually, let's start with a movie instead of sharing the PowerPoint. I will share. And we'll start with a movie. Those are 10 minutes. And just lost the movie. Hold on. Let's try that again. Too many windows were open on my desktop. There we go. Okay, I'm going to make it full screen. And this is a man named Robert Sternberg. And he's kind of a funny guy for a professor. Um, I I have yeah I I have some associations with him, but I can't remember if I actually met him. Anyway, I won a prize once that ended up giving me one of his books. So got some volume there. Can you hear it? I'm gonna open the chat. Yes. Okay. You could hear the bells ringing. Okay. I'm not used to using WebEx for teaching, so. Um, oh no, you didn't hear the bells. Okay. Let's see. There's probably a button that I have to press when I share. Share content. Nothing. Well, give me some thumbs up if you hear the sound when
Hi, my name is Bob Sternberg. I'm a professor of human development at Cornell University. My field is psychology and education. I'm a past president of the American Psychological Association. And I study in my research human intelligence, but I also have 5 children. So I've had an opportunity to see how it works when.
Okay. People are telling me they're not hearing it now. Something switched. Oop, that's the wrong. Go back a little bit.
I'm a professor of human development at Cornell University.
Thumbs up if you can
My
hear.
field is psychology and education. I'm a past president of the American Psychological Association. And I study in my research human intelligence, but I also have 5 children. So I've had an opportunity to see how it works when they grow up and practice. My theory of intelligence is called the theory of successful intelligence. And basically, successful intelligence is just your ability to figure out what you want to do with your life and to succeed in doing it, given the constraints of the environment in which you live. So, successful intelligence is different from IQ in that IQ is a fairly narrow measure that looks primarily at analytical skills and at knowledge, your ability to acquire knowledge and apply that knowledge, whereas successful intelligence isn't just about school success, it's really primarily about, as well, life success. I've had several different ways of focusing in my research. One is on teaching. So what I've been interested in is if students have different patterns of abilities. In the theory, I talk about a successfully intelligent person as someone who's creative in coming up with novel and useful ideas, someone who's analytical in being able to analyze those ideas, and someone who's practical, who has common sense and can make those ideas work in the real world. And so if some kids are more, say, analytical, and some are more creative, and some are more practical, the question I've asked is whether if we teach in ways that better help students to capitalize on or make the most of their strengths, and at the same time to compensate for or correct for weaknesses, will they do better in school? And I think it's an important question to ask because I know in my own case, I got interested in human intelligence because as a child, I did poorly on IQ tests. My teachers thought I was stupid. My parents thought I was stupid. I thought I was stupid. I did stupid work. My teachers were happy I did stupid work, and I was happy they were happy, and everyone was pretty happy. So what can happen if all you do is focus on these sort of narrow IQ-like abilities is you can end up missing out in seeing that there are kids who really can do quite a bit more than their IQ or just academic skills would predict. And what we've found across a variety of subject matter areas like social studies, mathematics, language arts, science, and across grade levels, ranging from about grade 4 through college, is if you take into account in your teaching that kids learn in different ways, that some are more creative, some are more analytical, some are more practical, you can improve student achievement. So it's not that you have to teach each student in a different way, but rather you say, hey, look, I'll teach in all these different ways at different times so that at least some of the time I reach each student. So if, for example, you're teaching history, you might do something that's just memorizing historical information, but you also might ask a student to analyze an historical event, like what were some of the causes of the start of World War II? Or you might ask the student to be creative and imagine, suppose that Germany and its allies had won World War II, what would the world be like today? Or you might ask them to do something practical, like what are the lessons of World War II for some of the conflicts we're facing in the world today, especially ones that involve genocides. So the idea in any subject matter area is just to vary your teaching style, and it will result in higher achievement by your students. The second thing we do is we try to devise tests that measure these different skills. So when we test, say, in, let's take a different subject matter area, language arts, we might have students analyze a work of literature or, say, compare and contrast two different works of literature. They might, for example, compare the writing styles of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, but we can also ask them to do something creative, like to write a poem or a short story, or a different ending for a book they read, like Tom Sawyer. Or we can ask them to do something practical, like what can you learn from Tom Sawyer in terms of how he persuaded his friends to whitewash the fence for him. So it's important, I think, to teach to these different ways of thinking, and it's also important to test to these different ways of thinking. Because if you don't both teach and test in the same way, what you may end up doing is teaching kids in a variety of ways, but then they learn through narrow testing that it's really only, say, memory that counts. Another thing we're interested in is the idea that kids from different cultural backgrounds or different ethnic group backgrounds may have different patterns of strengths. And indeed, their parents may even have different conceptions of what it means to be smart. For example, in a study we did in California, we found that Caucasian and Asian American parents more emphasized cognitive skills in their conceptions of intelligence, whereas Latino parents more emphasize social skills. But because their teachers' conceptions of intelligence were closer to those of the Caucasian and Asian American parents than they were to the conceptions of the Hispanic or Latino parents, those kids, the Caucasian kids and the Asian kids, did better in school. In other words, if the parents' conception of intelligence matches the teachers, it helps the children do better in school. In another study we found, looking at Eskimo kids, that although they didn't do very well on IQ tests or school-based tests, if it came to things like being able to get from one village to another in the frozen tundra in the winter without any apparent landmarks, or knowledge about hunting or fishing or gathering, these kids really knew a lot. And so what we discovered is that even though on conventional tests they didn't look very smart, and their teachers often didn't think they were very smart, they had a lot of skills that the teachers just didn't see. And when we taught the kids some geometric concepts using fish racks, which are something that's prevalent, that's common in their environment, the children learn better. So an important thing to take into account as well is that if you teach in ways that take into account the differences in backgrounds of the children in your classes, those children often will do better in school. The last thing I want to mention is that we've applied some of these ideas to college admissions. And we asked the question, say that instead of just looking at tests like the SAT or the ACT, we also assessed kids' creative and practical and even wisdom-based abilities. What would happen in the college admissions process? And what we found is that when we took into account creative thinking and practical common sense thinking as well as wisdom, we increased prediction of freshman year academic average. We increased prediction of extracurricular success and success in leadership activities, and we greatly reduced ethnic group differences between children of different ethnic groups. So the conclusion then is it really pays to think of intelligence more broadly, not just as a score on an IQ test or an SAT or an ACT or a GRE, but as really your ability to cope with life and make a success of your life. And when you think in these broader terms and teach more broadly and test more broadly, and remember that children of different cultural and ethnic groups may have been socialized in ways that emphasize different kinds of intelligence, student outcomes will be better. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I hope you found the information useful.
Okay, so that was Robert Sternberg. So on your uh, course page for this week, there are uh, a number of resources, and that is one of them. So we're talking about intelligence and uh, intelligence, language, and motivation today. So he was talking about uh, a theory of intelligence. What do you guys think intelligence really is? When you think of someone who's intelligent, what do you think of? You can either turn on your mic or you can put something in the chat. Smart. I try not to use the word smart because in some parts of the world, smart means you're dressed nicely. When I was growing up in England, that's what smart means. So, critical thinker, smart. Skill or talents that you're born with or you learn from your environment. Ability to cope in a situation. That's good, young son. I think you took something from what you just saw. Ability to cope in a situation. That's what Sternberg talks about. That it's not just um, academics. It's not just doing well in school, but it's doing well in life. And so there have been many theories of intelligence over the years. Okay, so now I'm going to go to your PowerPoint. Actually, I'll just briefly share uh, Blackboard. So we have another video called Kane's Arcade, and it's a really great video. It's about 10 minutes long. I'm not going to show it right now, but it's something that you should work about and think about how intelligent this young boy named Kane is. We have our PowerPoint that I'm going to open up in a minute, and the video that you just watched of Robert Sternberg talking about successful intelligence. Then there's another video of him, which is a longer one. Well, actually, it says it's only 11 minutes, a little bit longer, about which is a TED talk. So um, uh, it's also very good and, like I said, a little bit funny at the beginning. Uh, I like how Sternberg says he didn't do very well in school. He his teachers didn't think he did well in school, and his parents didn't think he did well in school. So, um, uh, and then there's another video called "Life at 9" about creativity, and that video is quite long. It's about an hour long. I watched it last night. Um, because these are things that Martha put up for you, and so I hadn't seen that before. Um, it's an excellent video. So it's about the Australian study. I'm not sure if you've seen other videos in that series yet from your other teachers, where they are comparing children from different backgrounds and different families, and they've been following them since they were babies. So these are the children when they're 9 years old, and they're specifically looking at creativity, which, according to Sternberg, is a form of our intelligence. So I will stop sharing that. So that's what's on Blackboard for this week. So I will share the PowerPoint. Quite a long PowerPoint, and there's a lot of information. It's coupled with the Sandrock textbook, chapter 12. Uh, I will not talk about everything that's here because, like I said, I'd be here for 6 hours if I did, and we've already gone through almost half an hour. So it starts with here. I'll start the slideshow. It starts with Kane's arcade video, so you can watch that. So the idea is that people for many years wanted to be able to measure what is intelligence. And so Sternberg talked a little bit about measurement. He talked about the SAT, that's the um, uh, Scholastic Aptitude Test that they use in the United States. You can't go to college without taking that test in the United States. You may have done formal testing along the way. Seneca does sometimes some testing for uh, English or language skills, depending on whether you've come into to Seneca as a mature student or from another um, place. And so you maybe have experienced that kind of assessment. That kind of assessment has been around for about 120 years. A man named Binet invented the first intelligence test, and it was to be able to quantify how well and predict how well children would do in school. So he started out with measuring intelligence in children to find out would they be successful in school. And those children, and the reason was that the government wanted to adopt schooling for everyone. So 120 years ago, there wasn't schools for everyone. People had to pay um, to go to school, or decide whether they would send their children to school. My grandmother taught school 130 some years ago. She taught until 1917, but she started teaching probably in about 1895, something like that. Um, and yeah, so the children that she taught were just the children in the community whose parents paid for for her to be their teacher. Um, so that's the way schools were back then. And the French government was one of the first governments to institute a countrywide education system where they wanted to have all children go to school and the government would pay for it. But they didn't want to have children who weren't going to be successful in school go to school. And so they asked Binet to devise a test to be able to differentiate between those children who were inevitably, according to them, going to fail in school and those children who would be successful. And so that was the purpose of the first intelligence test. So intelligence quotient, IQ, is the formula that they came up with where they would take a person's um, ability, which they called mental age, and divide it by their chronological age, how old they were, and multiply by 100 and get this thing called IQ. So if you were 10 years old and you scored like a 10-year-old, you would have 10 divided by 10, which equals 1 times 100. You would get a score of 100. If you were 12 years old and you scored like a 10-year-old, uh, then you would have uh, 10 divided by 12, which is about 83, or 0.83. So times 100 would be about 83. So if you're 12 years old, but you're only like a 10-year-old, your score is below 100. If you're 10 years old and you're like a 12-year-old, 10 divided by 12, 120, 1.2 times 100 is 120. You would end up with a score higher than 100. So higher than 100 means you're better than your average person of your age. Lower than 100 means you're worse than your average person of your age. So that's what IQ, where it came from. But over the last 120 years, many people, and Sternberg is one of them, who came, tried to say, well, there's more than just what we're measuring on an IQ test. And most IQ tests measure things, what we call analytical intelligence, your ability to analyze, judge, evaluate, compare, and contrast things. These are the kinds of things that are traditionally measured on IQ tests, and traditionally the kinds of things um, we test for in our schooling. Um, so people who do well on these traditional IQ tests tend to do well in school because we're measuring the same thing that we're testing them on in school. So these words like analyze, judge, evaluate, compare, and contrast. If you look at your learning outcomes for a lot of your courses, you will see some of those words. You won't see as many of the words create, design, invent, originate, imagine, um, or apply, implement, or put into practice, except that you're in an ECE program where there is a practical component to it. And so in your field placements, you are asked to apply and implement and put ideas into practice. And in some of your what do you call them, curriculum courses, you are asked to create, design, invent, and so you're I think you're fortunate to be taking a program like the um, early childhood education program, where we are asking you to do different kinds of things. And it's not all just about analytical intelligence, but you're testing. When we test you, um, a lot of times the kinds of things we ask you to do on tests are things like remember, memorize, analyze, judge. Those would also go in the analytic um, part of that. So Sternberg, as he said, he believed that all three are important, and if we ask students to use all three kinds of intelligence and we measure all three kinds of intelligence, then we're actually doing a better job of seeing who's going to do better in school. And like he said, they started using these kinds of ideas when they looked at college admissions as well, um, and not just our analytical sides. Gardner was another researcher who has ideas about intelligence, and his ideas are a little bit different from Sternberg. Sternberg broke it down into three areas. Now so he calls it the theory of successful intelligence. On the previous slide, it said triarchic theory, and that's because he started out with just these three components, and he's actually broadened it into more because he talks about wisdom too, which he talks about only in a little bit in that video that we just watched, but he talks about it more in the TED Talk. But Gardner's theory has 8 different kinds of intelligence. So he talks about verbal intelligence, and that's our ability to use words and language to express meaning. So um, verbal is intelligence. That's one of those analytical kinds of intelligence that we measure on traditional kinds of tests. When you remember the meaning of something, that is a verbal kind of skill. Mathematical, the ability to carry out math operations. He said that was something that's a little bit different. Some people can have strengths in one of these areas and not strengths in the other. So people can be more verbally intelligent and other people can be more mathematically intelligent. Spatial intelligence has to do with seeing the world in 3 dimensions and being able to um, pick up on things spatially very easily. So if you think about it, um, it- one way to think about these different kinds of intelligence is to think about the kinds of jobs someone would do. So somebody who has really great verbal intelligence might end up being a writer or an author, or someone who um, even a professor, someone who has to talk for a living. Um, Someone with mathematical intelligence might end up doing a lot of things with numbers in their life, being an accountant, for example. I have a brother who's an accountant. Spatial intelligence, that might be someone who's an artist, someone who can work with different materials to make it look like something else, or to be able to draw, or even an architect, somebody who can imagine spaces and create something, um, create kind of beautiful spaces that way, or even an interior designer, somebody like that. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence, Gardner said, well, some people don't have that, verbal or mathematical, the kinds of things that we would measure in school. And those would be the 2 areas that would be the academic kinds of intelligence. But some people instead are physically really adept, have really great sense of their body and can move their body well and can do a lot of things with their body, and they might be an athlete. So they can manipulate objects and manipulate themselves. So they might be an athlete, they might be a dancer, someone who can move their body in a really um, good way. Musical intelligence, someone who is sensitive to the pitch, melody, rhythm, tones that we use in music, but that's another kind of intelligence. And then there is um, the kinds of intelligence that are related to our socialization. So interpersonal intelligence is our ability to socialize with other people, to understand other people and interact with them really effectively. Um, Whereas intrapersonal is the ability to understand oneself. So to have a really depth of understanding of oneself. And then the last is the naturalist, the ability to see patterns and understand patterns in nature. Now, so Gardner thought there's a lot of different things, and these are all things that we value as humans. We value people's verbal abilities, people's mathematical abilities, people's spatial abilities in art, people's bodily kinesthetic abilities. We pay a lot of money to see athletes who can who can do great things. Music, we pay a lot of money to musicians to be able to produce great music. Um, and interpersonal and intrapersonal, those people are the people that can, get along well in the world. And then the naturalist as well. We appreciate what the naturalist can do for us as well. So all of these things are valued human capacities. People can have strengths in more than one. So I like to think that I have great verbal ability, great mathematical ability. I teach statistics at Seneca also. Um, I don't have very good bodily kinesthetic ability. Spatial ability is kind of borderline. My musical ability is really good because I've worked on that through my life. Interpersonal and intrapersonal, I think I have pretty good abilities there, and naturalist abilities. So, I've been that was something that I was socialized to do. But a lot of these things, that I say that I have strength in, they were a focus of my life. So, I had a father who was an English professor. Um, uh, Mathematics were my father also thought was something was very important in life. Um, so it was stressed to me to do well in mathematics. Um, Music was something that was important in my family because my mother was a an opera singer. Um, but my mother also, grew all of our food and, spent a lot of time in nature and uh, observed birds and animals and things like that. So I learned a lot about that as well. So, I think that a lot of that comes from having that rich environment. And so that is kind of another issue that people have considered about intelligence is how much comes from our culture, how much comes from our socialization, and how much of it is something that we're born with. Was it because my grandmother was a teacher that, I've got some good genes there? Or was it because my grandmother was a teacher that she imparted the importance of education on my father, and my father was a teacher and he gave the importance of education to me that I ended up being a teacher, so I'm like the third generation of teacher in my family. Why? Is that because we were born with some kind of good genes for teaching? Or was it that it was our culture? It was part of who we were raised to be. What do you guys think about that? What do when you think about yourself, do you think you're a product of your genes, your genetics, or about your who you are and your capability to get along in the world and be successful has to do um, with your situation, your environment, or is it both? You guys are pretty quiet. Don't get much in the chat very quickly. Hmm, my chat is no. My my slides are going crazy. My chat's disappearing. There we go. Got the chat back. Your capability and your culture. Yeah, both the genes and environment. So, um, I'm trying to get back on my PowerPoint where it was. Yeah. So, the brain, the brain plays a role, but our brain is influenced by the environment as well, because the brain develops along um, with the environment. So with the uh, stimulation the brain gets, but as well as, the nutrients that your body gets, all of those things affect your brain. Um, so genetics, one way that people have looked at genetics is to compare twins. So comparing those people who have identical genetics, identical DNA, to those who have uh, similar DNA or about 50% overlap. So that would be comparing identical twins to other sibling pairs, like brothers and sisters, or sisters and sisters, or brothers and brothers, who are not identical twins. So the IQ studies compare fraternal twins and identical twins. And there's also other studies where they compare parents and children, and they compare adopted parents and children to biological parents and children. So from doing those kinds of studies, and I'm not going to get into details of those studies, but from doing those kinds of studies, most people agree that genetics has a small influence in a person's intellectual ability, but the environment influences the opportunities that we have, and that can really make a difference in our um, in our ability to succeed in life. So environment is important. That people used to have this argument that, well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter what you did. For some children, they just weren't born with it, um, and so if they're not born to the right parents, then they're not going to be successful. And some parents still, some people still have these ideas about people from different cultures, or people from different races, or even people from different backgrounds. I know that um, I hate to say this about my own parents, but my father had really um, bad ideas about some people, and he really believed a lot in genetics. And he said that um, when I told him I wanted to get married to my husband, my first husband, my father said I was going to ruin the gene pool, because he didn't think that the person that I was going to marry was smart enough, because he wasn't educated like like I was, and like my parents were. And so he said I was ruining the gene pool, and that I wasn't going to have good children and smart children, and that he was disappointed in my choice of of a of a of a person to marry. And he told me that he chose my mother very carefully because of her intelligence. So um, so that there are lots of people who have those ideas, but what we know is that environment does have a big influence on, and so children whose parents may be seen as not as intelligent, those children can still go on and be very successful in life. And there are different kinds of success in life. And so, I didn't listen to my father. And now my children are grown, and my children are both very successful in their chosen ways of life. One is a personal support worker, so a person that works in a nursing home, and the other one is a bank professional. She's a bank manager. So both have been successful in their own ways in their own lives. Nothing to do with their father. So so yeah, so that's environment. Environment has that influence. So if you watch the last video that's posted this week, that video really talks about environment and that influence. Schooling also influences intelligence. So the kind of schooling you get influences what kinds of experiences you have. Schooling is a because children don't stay home with their parents 24 hours a day anymore. They spend a lot of time in school. The quality of the school and the way that people are teaching, whether they're emphasizing all of the verbal and mathematical kinds of abilities, or if they're emphasizing um, creative uh, experiences as well, those will make a difference. And so watch that last video, and that will we'll talk about that a lot. I'm just gonna skip over some of this stuff. You can read these slides on your own. Um, there's you know IQ testing and testing itself uh, does not really give us the answers about who's going to be successful in life, and so watch that other Sternberg video about that. And yeah, the extremes of intelligence. That one thing that we do with intelligence measures is we measure um, whether or not someone is on the mental retardation scale, which means they don't have the same kinds of abilities to adapt to their environment and adapt in life. And um, on the other end of the scale is what we call gifted, people who have above average abilities and talents. So that was very briefly about intelligence. Very briefly, while I was 45 minutes or so talking about intelligence, and and uh, like I said, I could. There's a lot of things, and I skipped over some of the things to talk about. There's a lot that could be talked about intelligence, but we just don't have a lot of time in this course. So, um, language. My area of expertise, so what I did my PhD in, is language development and school age language development specifically. So, as I said, I can talk to you for another couple hours about language, but we're very briefly going to talk about language development in the school age. So a lot of people think, by the time a child is 4 or 5 years old, they're speaking, their language is developed. No, we tend to focus on those early years, on early acquisition of vocabulary as children start using their first words, and um, and how their language develops and their ability to make all the different sounds. So you get in younger children, sometimes they have um, uh, problems making all the sounds, but they come by the time children are around 8 years old, they should be able to make all the different speech sounds of their own language. Um, Children who come from uh, different language background may still struggle with some speech sounds, and even some adults struggle with speech sounds based on a foreign language accent. But by mid childhood, by the time they're 8 years old, they've got that ability to use the sounds in their language. They can speak in sentences by the time they're 4 years old or so. So what is there to continue developing? Well, vocabulary is a big one. By the time a child is about 6 years old, they know about 14,000 words. By the time they're about 10 years old, this is 10 to 11 years old, they know about 40,000 words. And now, if you think about it, in that 4 year or so span between 6 and 10 or so, whoops, they have learned about 26,000 words. And if you break it down into how many days are there in those 4 years, there's about 1,400 days or so, 1,500 days. If you break it down into the number of days there are in that period and the number of words they've added to their vocabulary, they're actually learning about 30 new words a day. So this is um, a really intense period of learning of language. And this happens in other languages. It's not just English. I happen to study language in English, and um, this is from the textbook, but it's actually compatible with the study with I did that I did because the person that's cited in the textbook was my PhD supervisor. So um, so what I found, so I went beyond the age of 10 or 11, and I looked at children who were 13 and 16 years old. So by the time you're 16, you know about 85,000 words. By the time you're 13, you know about 80,000 words. So the biggest growth in language development as far as vocabulary goes is between the ages of 10 and 13, somewhere in that range. So what's happening in that later stage of of childhood, in that mid to late stage of childhood, where children are learning 30, 40 new words every day? What's happening is they learn to read, and they get a lot of vocabulary from reading. That's where we learn the most of our vocabulary, is reading. Whenever you read something and you're reading new material, you're coming across words that you may not have encountered before. You're seeing the words in different contexts. You're learning how those words are used in different ways. And we don't have to, study a dictionary or a list of words. The teacher might give a list of vocabulary words to learn this week. They might give you 10 words to learn this week, but that doesn't account for 30 words a day every day, because the teacher's not giving you a list of 200 words a week to learn. So children aren't learning them from opening dictionaries or from being taught them in school. They're learning a very small portion of their vocabulary that are actually being taught in school. The most vocabulary that they're learning is from reading. So that, they learn it from hearing, from people talking around them as well, but the majority comes from reading. And children who read more, their vocabularies read more, read better, read earlier, their vocabularies tend to be larger than children um, who don't. They also become better able to understand more complex grammar. So being able to understand different clauses within sentences. Uh, this is where, some of this ability is so inherent in our language that we don't even know that we have learned it. So, I can't necessarily, well, I can because I study language, but a child who is 10 years old who can use complex sentences can't can't describe the grammar of their sentence, can't explain the grammatical patterns to other people, um, but they use it correctly. So it's an implicit kind of learning that comes from use and comes from experience, and uh, and it comes from culture, because we see that the language that is used in their culture is tied to their language patterns. So in English, we have what we call standard English, which is what you will see in writing in your textbook. But there are many different dialects of English and um, many, and that includes vocabulary like we were talking about intelligence earlier, and I think was it Kristen? Oh, yeah, Christy. Sorry, Christy. I had to check what your name was. Christy said the word smart. Well, smart means something different in a different dialect of, of English. So we have different dialects from different places in the world, but also different communities of speakers. So even within Toronto, there are different communities of speakers who have different backgrounds that would speak in in a different um, way. And across Canada, we have many different dialects. Believe it or not, you might think, well, Canadian English is Canadian English. No, Ontario English is different than, slightly different than what you would hear out west. So, um, so if you hear someone speaking from Alberta, they might speak with a slightly different accent, so they say their words slightly differently, and they would have a little bit, their vocabulary even is a little bit different. So, does everybody know what a hoodie is? So a hoodie is a jacket. Um, sometimes pulls over your head, sometimes has a zipper, and um, tends to have a hood. Okay, so it's made out of fleece usually. Um, everybody knows that's a hoodie. Out west, they call them bunny hugs. So you don't have your hoodie on, you have your bunny hug on. Okay, so there's different vocabulary in different parts of Canada. In the east, the east coast is kind of famous for having different kinds of vocabulary and different uh, grammatical patterns as well. So people speak in a different way on the east coast of of Canada than they do in the center of Canada or the west of Canada. So I could give you examples there because I lived on the East Coast for 9 years, and that's where my daughter, the banker, still lives. She so she has uh, that accent and that vocabulary. So vocabulary is different. You'll hear people using words, and you'll think, hmm, what's that word, or why are they using that word? Um, yeah, I could give you examples, but I won't. I need to move on. Like I said, I could talk about language for a long time. So, um, so one of the things that children are developing in this school age is an awareness of language, an awareness and a knowledge about language. And some of this comes from school, so they know what a preposition is, or a noun, or a verb. They know about they can talk about the sounds in language and compare one speaker to another. And so this is what we call meta linguistic ability. It allows children to think about their language and understand what words are, and to be able to define words. So if you ask a a preschooler what a word is, they don't really necessarily understand that. And then um, uh, there's pragmatics. So pragmatics is knowing how to use language in a culturally appropriate way. So knowing, what tone of voice to use, in different situations, how to talk politely to some people versus, how you would talk with your friends, not necessarily the same way. So children have really good understanding of these things by the time they are adolescents. So, having trouble. Because I just turned on annotation and I didn't really want it. There we go. Okay. So reading, as I said, is really important in language development. So there are different approaches to teaching children to read. And this is what you're going to see really develop in the school age. So between the time the child is in kindergarten and the time they're in uh, grade grade 5 or 6, when they're at the end, when you're in an after school program, you have such a variety of children in their ability levels, it's and their social levels, everything. Um, there's such a big difference between a child who's 5 and a child who's 11. So you're going to see that. And one of the things that's kind of the most, I hate to say most important, but what we consider one of the most important achievements in this time period is learning to read. What educators consider is the most important. If you watch the videos about creativity, maybe reading isn't the most important, but as a culture, we think that reading is necessary and desirable. And so there are different approaches to teach children how to read. And the two main approaches are called the whole language approach and the phonics approach. So this slide is about the whole language approach. And the whole language approach is focused on the culture of reading. So reading should be something that children want to do, that they recognize as a desirable kind of thing to do, that they're reading. Um, there's a purpose to their reading. That they're they emphasize that where languages all around us and the culture of language. But the actual teaching of reading is not so much about the mechanics of reading, but the ability to recognize words. So sight words, you can see that word and you just know that is that particular word. So there's a lot of memorization of what words look like, but also using information surrounding words to guess at the meaning of words. So, take for example, you've got a story and there's a picture in the storybook of a child walking in the rain with an umbrella. And the sentence says, "When it rains, I use my umbrella." So the child may recognize some of those words when it um, uh, use my. So those are words that are frequent, that come up a lot. So they've memorized those words. And when they encounter a sentence like that, when it, and they see the picture, what's it doing? Well, maybe that word is rain. And then they see, I use my, and they recognize those words. And they read that sentence again. When it rains, I use my, oh, well, it's a picture of somebody using an umbrella. So that last word must be umbrella. So the child doesn't even have to sound out the word or figure out what the word says, because they can use the context of both the other words in the sentence and the uh, the pictures that might be in the book. So that's one approach to teaching children to read. Teaching children to memorize what some words look like, but also to use context to figure out what words mean. The other approach is to really analyze words by the individual letters. So look at the letters in the words and sound out what each letter has a specific sound or uh, combination of letters that makes particular sounds. And so we look at the shapes of the letters and we figure out. So we could see the word umbrella and see that it has a U, so it starts with a sound. Then it has an M, and that makes that sound. So mm, um, and then keep going from there. So there are benefits to both of these approaches, and there's a lot of research that shows that when you use phonics alone, children are very uninterested in reading, and a lot of children find it boring, tedious. They don't want to just focus on the sounds of the words. And traditional phonics would be just looking at lists of words that start with the same sounds or have the same letter combinations in them. And it's very boring for children. Whereas reading books is something that's more fun for children. And so the whole language approach, where you're reading for the joy of reading and you're looking at books with pictures in them and figuring out how to read from that, um, makes reading more interesting and more desirable for children. However, the research shows that just the whole language approach and figuring out what words look like and figuring out words from context doesn't work by itself. You still need some ability to break down words by their sounds. And so um, combining these two approaches is actually the best approach for children learning to read. This is a little video about, or a little article, sorry, about children's reading and um, what what children are reading and um, in context. So you can look at that on your own. Second language learning is really important in our culture as well. We get a lot of children that you will encounter for whom the language of instruction is not their first language. So whether it's a French language instruction and their English language background, or it's French language instruction and they have another language background, or if it's English language instruction um, and they have a different language background. So for younger children, learning new language is easier. Um, for teens and adults, new vocabulary is easier than new sounds and new grammar. And that's why when adults learn a second language, they tend to speak that second language with a stronger accent than a young child will. And like I said, like I grew up speaking with a different accent than I do now because I grew up in England. And but I was 9 when I came to Canada and haven't been back there since I was 9. Um, and so at 9, I was able to get rid of that accent or gain the Canadian accent that I have now. But for um, uh, teens and adults who come from another place, they may retain the accent of the place that they are from, or the foreign language accent. Adults tend to learn second language faster. Uh, no, adults don't tend to learn a second language faster than children. Um, um, Adults can learn a second language faster than children, but really it has to do with motivation. It has to do with motivation. So I don't quite agree with what your textbook says about adults learning a language faster. They can if they're motivated, but children tend to learn a second language faster. So people who are bilingual are people who can speak two languages. And being bilingual is a really positive thing for children. Children who are fluent in more than one language, or even adults. So if you are fluent in more than one language, if I really have terribly high respect for my students for whom English is not their first language, who are studying in that second language. I have an ability to speak some in a second language, in French, but I would never try to take on education in that second language because I would find that very difficult. I think that that's amazing that when people do that. So if you're fluent in two languages, you actually have better thinking skills, better control of intention, better analytical reasoning, better cognitive flexibility, and so um, better in some of the skills that we that we value as good cognitive skills. I don't know how else to say it. Okay, the last topic, and we don't have a lot of time left for today's lesson, is about motivation. So I mentioned motivation when I was talking about language. So motivation is really important for learning a second language. People who are really motivated to speak with a lot of people in that second language will develop that language um, more strongly. And so children tend to develop language, um, a new language more easily than, say, their parents do, or if they've emigrated to a new place, because children are really motivated to have friends and to talk to other people, whereas parents might stick to themselves more and be less motivated. But every individual is different. There are two different kinds of motivation that we talk about. One is what we call intrinsic motivation, and the opposite of that is extrinsic. So, intrinsic is what I'm going to talk about first. When we talk about motivation, motivation to learn. So, motivation to learn a language is one thing, but we can just have general motivation to learn. So, our motivation, our intrinsic motivation, is when the motivation, it comes from yourself. You are self-determined. You really want this for yourself. You're curious. You like the challenge. You like the effort that it takes. And this could be, anything in life. You're motivated to learn a new sport. You really want the challenge of learning this new thing. You like doing it. You spend a lot of time practicing it, and so you um, because you spend more time at it, you might get better at it. Children's schoolwork is something that they could be motivated about or not. A student who studies hard because they're intrinsically motivated, they like the challenge, they like learning, they're curious about new things, they like getting high grades because it's something that makes them feel good for themselves. That is that is kind of our goal. We want children to be curious, to challenge themselves, to like to learn. So if children believe they're doing something because it's their own decision, they're more likely to be successful at it. So teachers want to encourage students' own intrinsic motivation. They want to, when they see a child doing something or succeeding in something, or spending a lot of effort in something, teachers want to encourage that. So you want to encourage something that uh, the students are good at, that they're internally motivated for. The opposite kind of motivation is what we call extrinsic motivation. And that's when we're motivated because of something external. And a lot of times it's because of a reward. So rewards, or the opposite of that, punishment. So we can be motivated not to do something by a punishment. But a reward is um, something external. So I'm teaching because I get a paycheck. If I do this job, I get a paycheck. That would be an external motivation. Actually, I'm more of an intrinsically motivated person. I do it because I enjoy it and because I get a lot of satisfaction with my interactions with students and things like that. But that paycheck is good too. So, um, most of the things that we do in the world, we're motivated by, um, in our culture. Our culture sets it up so that we're motivated by those external rewards. And we can socialize children to be rewarded that way as well. So we can, set up their environment so that we give them stickers, or we give them money, or we give them, you know, um, praise. praise is actually an extrinsic motivator. It's not something that's internal to the child. There are some children who really only want to do things because they're going to get praised by somebody. So they're looking for that external. Look, I cleaned up my room. And it wasn't, I cleaned up my room because I wanted to do that. I wanted the satisfaction of organizing things and putting things. No, they wanted mom to say, great job. Oh, wow, look at your room. So proud of you. So having that external motivation, it's built into our culture. You know, I ask people all the time, why are you saying good job to that student? Why are you saying that? It's a reward. It makes them feel good, yes, but it doesn't intrinsically motivate them. So there are other ways, other things that we can say besides good job that will help build a student's intrinsic motivation. I think this is really important, especially in a school age program where students at middle childhood, they start to be more and more extrinsically motivated. They're looking for marks. Why are you doing your homework? Because I want an A. Why are you reading about that? Because if I don't read it, my teacher's going to be mad at me. Or why are you cleaning your room? Because I want somebody to tell me that I'm good. You know, um, so people, you know, a child will show you their picture. And what do you do when they show you your picture? They just drew this picture. It's got some, you know, flowers and trees and things. What do you say to that child? Anybody have any ideas of what they would say to a child who showed them a picture they just drew? Nobody wants to say. Well, most people say, wow, I love your picture. Looks great. Ah, Gina said, what is it? Okay, so what if it's really blatant? You know, there's some flowers and the sun and a house. Like, you're not going to say, what is it, Gina? What else could you say? You could say something similar, but in a different way, so it's not so, you know, not so insulting to them. I don't recognize your flowers and trees and houses. You just want them to explain it more. So you could say, tell me about your picture. And you do it in an excited kind of way. And, you know, that is motivating them, but it's motivating them to explain, you know, what they drew and why. So tell me about your picture. And then that becomes more of an internalizing kind of experience for them instead of just motivating them. So they're still being motivated by other people being interested in it, but it's not, I just need you to tell me I'm good. And so there's a difference um, uh, between the kind of conversation that intrinsically motivates someone versus the empty praise, we call it. So I'm sure you know all this, and this is something that you I'm sure you've heard from your curriculum classes as well. So in school, we call it mastery motivation versus um, uh, what we call learned helplessness. So children can respond in different ways to a challenge. A child who shows mastery motivation, they're task oriented. They are concentrating on the strategies they need and the process of achievement rather than the outcome. So they like the challenge. They like doing things that they like learning. They learning for the sake of learning. They're not just learning to get the grade. Now, sometimes these children who are mastery motivated tend to get higher grades. So you can kind of see a difference between a student who's really mastery motivated, who really just likes the challenge, versus someone who is um, uh, maybe more on the perfectionist kind of scale, where they're just trying to get the grades. Um, and if you watch that video about creativity, you'll see there's a little guy who's really all about getting the grades, and it's not always healthy. Um, it's some of the things that he says about himself are are not always good. The opposite of mastery oriented is someone that we call um, helpless orientation, or has learned some helplessness. And they, instead of seeing something as a challenge and as something that is exciting, something to work on, they see challenges as just something that is difficult. And so they might, um, you know, a child, you give two children uh, a math problem or something, and the one who is um, mastery oriented will try to come up with ways to solve that problem. And even if it's something that's difficult for them, they will keep trying. Whereas helpless orientation, the child will see it's difficult and they'll give up really quickly. I can't. I can't do it. I'm not good at this. It's too hard. Um, I've met adults that are like this as well. Um, I can think of a friend of mine's adult son who's just like, I can't do math. I just can't. It's just too hard. And then he was trying to do his GED, getting his high school diploma, and that he had to do the math section. And I was working on the math with him because I'm really good at math, and I think I'm a good math teacher too. So, so I was working on it with him, and he was like, "Hey, I I can actually do it. I can figure this out." So once you get them to get past that, but there are some people that it's just really difficult to get them past that. They really believe, I can't do it. I'm not good at it. I don't have a math brain, or I don't, math is a subject that I use as an example a lot, because a lot of people have this helpless orientation toward math. But it could be anything. It could be you know language. Oh, I'm not good at writing. I can't I can't write a story. I just can't. I can't think of anything. I'm just not good at it. And so these children view their performance as a failure. They often feel anxious about it, and then that makes it even worse. Their anxiety about it and feeling like they're not good at it makes them even less likely to try, and it makes their performance um, worse. So we want children to have more of that mastery sense, where if I try, I can actually succeed, versus it doesn't matter how hard I try. I'm just not good enough. So when you see the difference, it's where it's something internal about the child. They think it doesn't matter if I try. Trying's not going to make a difference, because I as a person am just not good. I just don't have that capability. I don't have that brain. I can't do it. Versus a child who says, "Hmm, I don't know how to do this. I need to learn how to do this. I need to try, and maybe the more I try, the better I'll get at it." And everybody might have some tendencies toward this, and it might even be different in different subjects. So for me, it's like my athletic ability. I say. it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be good at sports. Until I have the right coach who tells me, well, how about if you try this way, or if you do this way, you might actually be able to do it. I actually did have success. All my life I thought I was not good at anything physical. And then I had a good friend who helped me learn a sport. I learned how to curl, and I realized, hey, if you actually work at this, you can get better. So I had kind of that helpless orientation towards sports and physical activity. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter how much I practice, how much I try. I'm just not good at that. It's just something about me. I'm not good at it. But then I had somebody who got me past that helpless orientation into the mastery orientation. Hey, if I if I go to practice and I spend some time at this, I could actually get better. And so we can have that thought about ourselves in any kind of orientation. So it's kind of like mental health issue as well. Um, so so what can we do to make children more um, in this mindset that something is a challenge, um, but challenges help us grow. So the growth mindset versus having that fixed mindset. It doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference. Things can't change versus the growth mindset. If I believe that there's things that I can change through effort, then I can grow and develop. So we want children to have that growth mindset or that mastery motivation that they can, if you work on things, you can change and you can get better. So it's critical that we help children develop um, this belief in themselves, belief that they can, and expectation that they're able to do well. So, what are some things that we can say to children to uh, to help them to have this kind of idea? So, have to, yeah, child comes to you, they're struggling with something in their homework, and they say, "I can't, I just can't do it. I'm dumb." What do you say? Let's try it again together. Yeah. Scaffolding. So thinking about Vygotsky and his perspective, scaffolding that a child's um, ability. So yeah, maybe they can't do it on their own yet. So using words like yet. Well, yeah, it seems like you didn't get the right answer yet. So I really like that word yet. We talk about that with even with younger children, with infants and toddlers. No, he's not talking yet. Okay? But the word yet means it's not there, but it's still going to come. So let's try it again together, and giving them that scaffolding, giving them just enough help that they can be successful with it. You can analyze and see where they're going wrong, and that's what a good teacher does. So a good teacher is someone that encourages children, encourages them to be um, uh, to have this uh, I can attitude, that they um, to get rid of that I can't do it, I'm just not good enough, I'm not smart, I'm dumb. And maybe it's, they're struggling more with one area. So what are you good at? There's always things that children are good at. I really want you to watch the video, the longer video, um, about the children in Australia, because uh, there's some children there that I really see. I see all of these different kinds of things that are, it's real. These are these are the real ways that children feel. And you see children from certain backgrounds, and they just feel like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do it. And then you see them succeed in something, and like, their eyes light up, like, oh, maybe I am good at something else. So yeah, just finding something where it is their strength, and encouraging them, and say, look how much time you spent doing that activity, and you're so good at it. Maybe it's a computer game that they're playing at home. Yeah, you're really good at playing that computer game. You must spend a lot of time practicing that. Maybe we'll spend some time practicing your math together, and you'll get good at that too. So kind of changing those attitudes. I know I'm joking around a little bit, but that's, you know, because sometimes there are students who are like that, who are, they're good at sports, or they're good at things that uh, they like to do more. So it's getting them to like these other tasks as well. All right, I think that uh, that's all I wanted to talk about. There's a little bit left in your notes about goals and goal setting, and one way to help children develop goals that are, so that they're not facing challenges that are too unrealistic for them, to help them develop their self-efficacy. And I think that that's about it. Modeling achievement motivation, talking about your own hard work, and how much your hard work uh, pays off. Oh, I worked so hard at that, and I really learned it. Model that for them. And the relationship to the teachers, and to their social status in class as well, and how those impact with their cognitive, with their academic development as well. Okay, so that's it for today for the PowerPoint. Stop sharing. So read those PowerPoints again, read the textbook. If you don't have the textbook, read the alternate uh, uh, textbook that there's a link for. Um, and if you have any questions about anything, you can always ask me. I believe that you do have a test at the end of the term, so these materials are going to be covered on that test. So if you do have any questions or concerns before that, um, we have, let's see, how many more classes do we have? Today is the 29th, so we have another class on April 12th, and that will be an end of term review. So I'm going to review some of the material that's going to be on that end of term test, and you'll be able to ask questions and things like that. And then the last class is the test. So does anybody have any questions, comments about today's material? Which date do you have the test? So I believe it's the 20th. I have to look at calendar just to check the dates, because I month. So today's 29th, and then we have no class on the 5th, 12th. Oh, I guess it's the 19th. 19th is our test. So the 12th will be our review day, and then the 19th will be the test because it's Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna